This is the Music Halls of Fame podcast. This week we honor the year in music for 2004 along with a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 2004. We also look at the list of nominees for this year's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony, and our Spotlight Hall of Fame is the Nesuhi Ertegun Jazz Hall of Fame in New York City. Before we get going with the podcast, like everyone tells you, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll know when these podcast episodes drop, which is usually every Thursday. Now, on to this week's episode. The year was 2004. In music, the only things people seemed to talk about were Britney Spears marrying and divorcing her childhood friend, Jason Allen Alexander, all in 3 days, and then later in the year marrying dancer Kevin Federline. Also, Ashlee Simpson's lip-syncing her performance on Saturday Night Live, and the Super Bowl wardrobe malfunction event with Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson on February 1st. Other events of the year, though, included opera star Luciano Pavarotti performing in his final opera, Elton John starting his Las Vegas residency at Caesars Palace, Brian McFadden leaving Westlife, Clint Lowry leaving Sevendust, the massive Rock in Rio concert festival taking place, Paul Rodgers joining Queen for a little while, The Killers and Velvet Revolver debuting, as did the Jazz at Lincoln Center performing venue, and a Dave Matthews Band tour bus dumping their raw sewage into the Chicago River, hitting a tour boat that was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Not a good thing. Bands that actually formed in 2004 included the Body Rockers, Bring Me the Horizon, Ryan Adams and the Cardinals, Cascada, Camel Fat, Ally and AJ, Digitalism, Fort Minor, Nero, Pompeii, kind of appropriate when you think about it, Panic at the Disco, and Paramore. Bands that either broke up or took an extended break included All About Eve, the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, No Doubt, Atomic Kitten, Bachman Turner Overdrive, Orbital, Concrete Blonde, Jan and Dean, Jane's Addiction, Sixpence None the Richer, Matchbox 20, Creed, King Crimson, and Yes. A good chunk of those bands ended up reuniting as the years went on. Bands that actually got back together for a little while in 2004 included Destiny's Child, the New York Dolls, Megadeth, and Restless Heart. Artists who were born in 2004 included Grace VanderWaal and Mackenzie Ziegler. Artists who passed away in 2004 included The Genius, Mr. Ray Charles, Rick James, Johnny Ramone of the Ramones, Laura Branigan, Sasha Distel, Jimmy Hassel of the First Edition, Cornelius Bumpus of the Doobie Brothers, Dimebag Darrell of Pantera, Peggy DeCastro of the DeCastro Sisters, John McKeough of Sushi and the Banshees, Jan Berry of Jan and Dean, Nikki Sullivan of Buddy Holly and the Crickets, Felix Haug of Double, Arthur Kane of the New York Dolls, Michael Connor of Pure Prairie League, Bruce Palmer of Buffalo Springfield, Alex Soria of the Nils, rappers Old Dirty Bastard, Billboard, and Mac Dre, band leader Artie Shaw, jazz drummer Elvin Jones, record producer Quorthon, and composers Jerry Goldsmith and Elmer Bernstein. The biggest selling album of 2004 was Usher's Confessions. Other artists who had big albums that year were Kenny Chesney, Green Day, Norah Jones, Avril Lavigne, U2, Gwen Stefani, Anastasia, Maroon 5, Evanescence, Ashlee Simpson, Eminem, Tim McGraw, and the Jay-Z and Linkin Park collaboration Collision Course. The biggest single of the year was Usher's Yeah. Other big singles for the year were Ciara's Goodies, Snoop Dogg's Drop It Like It's Hot, Avril Lavigne's My Happy Ending, Alicia Keys' If I Ain't Got You, and also My Boo, the duet she did with Usher, Jaquan's Tipsy, Mario's I Don't Wanna Know, Fat Joe and Terror Squad's Lean Back, Ashley Simpson's Pieces of Me, and Nina Sky's Move Your Body. In country music, the biggest singles were released by Toby Keith, Tim McGraw, Keith Urban, Terry Clark, George Strait, Montgomery Gentry, Phil Vassar, Rascal Flatts, Lone Star, Gary Allen, Gretchen Wilson, and Alan Jackson. The biggest albums were released by Keith Urban, Rascal Flatts, Gretchen Wilson, Big and Rich, Jimmy Buffett, Tim McGraw, Alan Jackson, Kenny Chesney, along with the Greatest Hits albums by George Strait and Shania Twain. In dance music, the club play charts were, as usual, dominated by pop and R&B artists. This time around, the crossover artists were Britney Spears, Duran Duran, Annie Lennox, Elton John, Dido, Madonna, Simply Red, Janet Jackson, Beyonce, and George Michael. Legit dance artists who made the top of the dance charts included Goldfrapp, the legendary Mr. Frankie Knuckles, Curtis Mantronic, Christine W., Junior Jack, Robbie Rivera, Dirty Vegas, along with Eric Prydz' version of Steve Winwood's hit song Valerie, which he called Call on Me. In hip-hop, some of the biggest albums were released by Eminem, D12, Kanye, Lloyd Banks, Nelly, Young Buck, the Beastie Boys, Ludacris, and a Tupac posthumous release called Loyal to the Game. The biggest selling one for 2004 actually dropped in 2003. Outkast's Speakerboxx The Love Below, especially after they won the 2003 Grammy Award for Album of the Year. Some of the biggest singles were Drop It Like It's Hot by Snoop Dogg and Pharrell Williams, Outkast's The Way You Move, and Jay-Z's Dirt Off Your Shoulder and 99 Problems, along with songs by Twista and Kanye, Nelly and Tim McGraw, Lloyd Banks, Fabulous, and Lil Wayne. In Latin music, Daddy Yankee released the best-selling Latin album of the decade, Barrio Fino. The album helped reggaeton crash headlong into the mainstream. The most critically acclaimed Latin artist of the year, though, was Alejandro Sanz. Other big Latin artists included Los Temerarios, Paulina Rubio, Juanes, Grupo Climax, Luis Miguel, Marc Anthony, Los Tigres del Norte, Adán Sánchez, and Intocable. At the Grammy Awards for Music from 2004, it was the year of Ray Charles, who put out an album the same year that he passed away, by the way, and who also won Album and Record of the Year. While John Mayer won Song of the Year and Best New Artist actually went to Maroon 5 over Joss Stone and Kanye. Go figure that one. At the American Music Awards, Usher and Sheryl Crow were the big winners. At the Billboard Music Awards, Usher won Artist of the Year. At the MTV Video Music Awards, Outkast won Video of the Year for the song Hey Ya. At the Eurovision Singing Contest, which was held in Istanbul, Turkey that year, Ukraine won for the song Wild Dances. At the Tony Awards, Avenue Q won Best Musical and Assassins won Best Revival of a Musical. The Pulitzer Prize for Music went to Paul Moravec for Tempest Fantasy, along with Steve Reich for Three Tales and Peter Lieberson for Piano Concerto No. 3. Musically, at the Academy Awards, Finding Neverland won Best Score, while a song by Jorge Drexler from The Motorcycle Diaries won Best Song. In 2004, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted Rolling Stone magazine editor Jan Wenner into the Non-Performer Lifetime Achievement Award category. The ceremony, though, is perhaps best remembered for Prince's blistering guitar solo on the song While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which was played in honor of George Harrison, who was inducted into the Performers category. Along with Prince, Jackson Browne, The Dells, Traffic, ZZ Top, and this next artist. Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band were, in a sense, not one, but two bands. There was the band that Seger toured with, but in the studio, he worked mainly with the famous Muscle Shoals rhythm section. Seger released his first album in 1968. He had a few hits here and there. After that, Seger averaged an album release every 9 months or so. During the early 1970s, Bob developed a reputation for being a great concert draw. His 1975 live album, Live Bullet, cemented that reputation and turned the album into a hit. In 1976, Seger released his 10th album, Night Moves, which was the first album that he recorded with the Silver Bullet Band. That album sold 6 million copies. 2 years later, he was putting the final touches on his 11th album, Stranger in Town. For this album, he recorded about half the album with the Silver Bullet Band and half with Muscle Shoals. One of his biggest songs was Old Time Rock and Roll. Who actually wrote the song depends on whose version of the story you go with. The official credit goes to George Jackson and Thomas E. Jones III. According to them, Seger was finishing up the album and he asked for more songs to use as filler for the album. The song you hear on the recording is their version of the song. Seger, however, tells it a different way. He says that when he got the song, he stripped and rewrote the verses, but kept the chorus of the song. When his management told him that he should take 1/3 of the songwriting credit, Seger said no, because Seger didn't think that it would be a hit. Seger calls it the dumbest thing he's ever done financially. At first, though, he was right. When Old Time Rock and Roll was released in March of 1979, the song was just a marginal success, but nothing too major. And then along came Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise in 1983 was a kid who had a couple of movie credits to his name. In 1981, he debuted in the movie Taps. 1983 was his watershed year. He had a small part in the movie The Outsiders and then starred in a movie called Losing It. He ended the year with the movie All the Right Moves, but in between Losing It and All the Right Moves, he ended up in a movie co-starring Rebecca De Mornay. Fun fact, this movie also had 3 other actors who would eventually become very well known in the 1980s and 90s. Joe Pantoliano, who was Will Smith's and Martin Lawrence's boss in the Bad Boys movies, and who was also in the original Matrix movie. Curtis Armstrong, who would go on to play Booger in the Revenge of the Nerds movies, and Bronson Pinchot, who would have a memorable role in the Beverly Hills Cop movies as the art gallery assistant, and who would also play Balky in the Perfect Strangers TV series. Also, according to the tabloids of the time, Cruise and De Mornay were dating while making the movie. Since those stories can be manufactured by the media or the movie studio just to drum up a little extra PR for their movie, who knows if that's actually true or not. The movie was called Risky Business, which would go on to become a huge hit and turn Tom Cruise into bankable box office. In the movie, there was a memorable scene at the beginning when Cruise is finally in his house alone. He blasts this song on the stereo system, slides across the floor in a dress shirt and his underwear, and proceeds to dance and lip-sync to Old Time Rock and Roll. The movie became a big hit. It also gave the song new life and popularities, and these days, who doesn't know and love the song? It's one of the most popular jukebox and classic rock songs of all time, and since Seger opted not to get songwriting credit for the song, that move cost him millions of dollars over time. Don't worry, he still has millions from all his other great songs. After Night Moves, Seger put out the album Stranger in Town, which is the album that had Old Time Rock and Roll on it. That album also had The Distance, Against the Wind, and Like a Rock, all of which were big hits. Along the way, he also had hit singles like Shakedown from Beverly Hills Cop 2. Seger is still going strong to this day, still touring, still putting out the occasional album or two. Presented for induction by Kid Rock, Bob Seger, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2004. Before we get to the rest of the podcast, we'd like to tell you about our other podcast, the Music History Today podcast. Every day we tell you what happened on that date in music history, along with music releases, birthdays, and passings. So, if you like this podcast and want more music history, then please search the Music History Today podcast in audio or video form on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame recently announced this year's nominees for induction into the class of 2023. They are Kate Bush, Sheryl Crow, Missy Elliott, Iron Maiden, Joy Division and New Order, Cyndi Lauper, George Michael, Willie Nelson, Rage Against the Machine, Soundgarden, The Spinners, A Tribe Called Quest, The White Stripes, and Warren Zevon. Now, first look at the list. Actually, it's not that bad. In fact, it's actually pretty decent. I can't really argue against any of these acts except for maybe one, The Spinners, because that would not have been my R&B group to throw up for nomination. That's just me. I would have gone with either Chic or the Commodores, maybe. But this is not the final list. The final list is up to you, partially at least. There is a fan vote. If you go to rockhall.com, you can vote for 5 artists every single day right up until the end of April. What we will do is we will break down every week 1 or 2 artists and make the case for putting them into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and to also make the case for you to actually put your vote to them. Now, when I look at this list, the one thing that really leaps out, okay, 2, aside from the fact that the Spinners made this list, is the fact that Joy Division and New Order were both put on there in one slot, even though they're 2 different bands. However, if you know your history about those bands, you know that they are essentially the same band, except that the lead singer of Joy Division, Ian Curtis, committed suicide, and all the rest of the members just went on as New Order. So I guess that is how the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame committee decided to put both bands together into one nomination. Out of this entire list, though, only 6 are going to get into the hall in the performers category. We could have a situation like we had last year when Judas Priest and LL Cool J were on the nominations list but did not make the final list for the performers category. However, they still got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in other categories. We could have a very similar situation this year. So it may end up being that maybe 7 or even 8 of the acts on this list will make it in. However, this starts with you. Every day, vote for 5 different artists. The voting ends at the end of April, and we will start going over each individual artist next week. Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts in New York City is one of the premier performing venues in America. The facility holds the Metropolitan Opera, the New York Ballet, the New York City Opera, the New York Philharmonic, a New York City Library for the Performing Arts, and the Juilliard School for the Performing Arts. In 1987, jazz and classical trumpet player Wynton Marsalis started a jazz concert series, which grew into Jazz at Lincoln Center Foundation in 1996. The foundation runs an academy that offers free programs for schools. In 2004, the foundation started the Nesuhi Ertegun Jazz Hall of Fame. The hall is named after Nesuhi Ertegun, who, along with his brother Ahmet, founded Atlantic Records. The hall voters are made up of 60 international experts of musicians and scholars. In its first class in 2004, the hall inducted acts like Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, and Miles Davis, along with this next artist. In 1928, jazz master King Oliver was at the top of his game. He was selling out concerts in Chicago and making classic recordings with a top-notch band. On June 11th of that year, he recorded a pretty decent version of a song. Now, until 1924, King Oliver had a member of his band who was a pretty good trumpet player. This member was a prodigy who studied under Oliver, but at a certain point, a student has to move on, so the teacher and the student amicably parted ways. You know how it goes. Birds gotta fly. Between 1924 to 1928, the student left Chicago and also switched instruments. He became a man for himself elsewhere. However, the student decided to come back to Chicago for better opportunities. On June 22, 1928, the student walked into a recording studio to record with one of his side project bands. The song he decided to record that day was that song that King Oliver recorded only a few weeks earlier. However, the student didn't simply copy the song. He changed it up a little. For starters, he completely stripped the opening down to one instrument, his. Then he improvised that opening. Also, instead of putting any vocals to the song, he did a new form of vocalizing called scat. The song became a big hit. Today, it is considered one of the greatest recordings of any genre and the greatest jazz recording ever made. It heralded jazz as being an art form. On that day, the student became the master, with the master song no less. Even though both men would record the song many times over their careers, it's that trumpet player Louis Armstrong's version of that song, West End Blues, that is considered the classic. It is also part of the recordings that the National Recording Registry decided to make part of its first inductees, where it put all of the recordings that Louis Armstrong made with that side project band of his, the Hot 5 and also the Hot 7 bands, between the years 1924 to 1928. Louis' career went on for much of the 20th century until his passing in 1971. He is known not only as one of the most influential jazz musicians of all time, but also one of the most important musicians, regardless of genre, of the past 150 years. Satchmo, the legendary Mr. Louis Armstrong, inducted into the Nesuhi Ertegun Jazz Hall of Fame in New York City in 2004. And that is it for this episode of the Music Halls of Fame podcast. For more podcast episodes, which drop every Thursday in audio and video form, then please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio Podcasts, CastBox, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from.